I just want to introduce myself to you all. My name is Andrea Davis. I am the Programme Manager at the Civil Service College. This morning I am joined by our expert trainer, Mel Owers. He is here to deliver this session on understanding and managing conflict. The session should last about 1 hour. Again, we want maximum participation from you all. There will be time for Q&As at the very end, but please don't hold back. If you do have any questions, if you want to ask Elle or myself any questions, please feel free to shoot them in the Q&A box or the comment box. And if we don't answer them there and then, obviously we'll answer them at the very, very end. So please do, speak up and share your experiences throughout. Okay, just to let you know as well that this webinar will be recorded. So we will be posting this on our YouTube channel, probably either by the end of today or tomorrow. So if you do have any contacts or colleagues that cannot make today's session, please do let them know that we will post the recording online, or you can share that with them as well. All right, so thank you very much, Mel. If you could just move to the next slide. Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you, Mel. Okay, so here is the Civil Service College. What do we do? Where are we? I know that a lot of you do tune in each and every week. And for those that don't know much about us, if this is your first time on one of our webinars, I just want to say again a big hello. We are an independent training organisation that offers training solutions to the UK civil service and the wider public sector. We have delivered training to not just central government departments, such as the Cabinet Office, DEFRA and DWP, but also devolved administrations like the Welsh Government and, of course, our NHS, as well as local authorities. So you can see our UK footprint here. We are based in London, right in the heart of Westminster. So please do come on by when travel permits and you want to do your training in the classroom. We are based in the heart of Whitehall. So please do come along and say hello. Okay, thank you, Mel. Not only do we work in the UK, of course, we work internationally as well. So you can see our international footprint is here. We do work from the Middle East, right over to India and so on. We do offer our training solutions both in country as well as in the UK. So if you do have any international inquiries, if you do have any questions about any of our training, if you are abroad, please do contact us. I will provide our contact details at the very, very end of the session. And we can actually fly our trainers out to your country, as well as designing programs for people like yourself around the world to come over to the UK and study here as well. All right, thank you, Mel. Okay, so our course categories and services, we offer around about 70 different types of courses, ranging from, you can see here, accountability and governance, to leadership and management, professional development, policy, law and legal, media, digital and data, and finance and commercial. This particular webinar does fall under the leadership and management category. If you do have any questions about this webinar, if you want to find out more, Mel can actually give you further information about the types of courses he runs around this. And we can obviously draft up or design something that fit the needs of your organisation. And we can provide you with more information about the types of courses Mel runs as well, because he doesn't just run this course, he does multiple courses for the college. So our services, given the fact, obviously, due to the pandemic, we have moved all of our courses online. So obviously, given when travel permits, you can come into the classroom and do your training with us face to face. But we just want to kind of let you know that all of our training courses, no matter what they are, we do put them online as well. So we can offer digital virtual solutions for you, so you don't have to put yourself in a position where you're in the classroom environment. So we do offer those solutions for you. Again, which I touched on earlier, we do offer international training. So for whatever reason, if you want to come to the UK to do your training, or if you want to, go to, if you want to train up, come to see you, we can put something together. That's absolutely fine. Just get in touch and we'll provide you with more information. All right, thank you, Mel. Okay, so as you all know, as mentioned, today's webinar is on understanding and managing conflict. This session will enable you to understand what conflict really is and how it develops through various different stages by looking at patterns that emerge. Mel will also explore with you the different types of styles and techniques that you can use when dealing with conflict in your general day-to-day life, as well as the workplace, of course. The aim of this session is for you to come away with helpful techniques in order for you to recognise, manage and deal with conflict. So again, as mentioned before, Mel will be with you for the full hour to provide you with different techniques and tools. So just to introduce our fantastic trainer that's with us this morning, again, this is Mel Owers. Mel's expertise lie in leadership, management and interpersonal skills training. This has been underpinned by both his professional knowledge and practical experience. His experience includes the development of competence frameworks, coaching senior leaders, leadership of large-scale recruitment, and the delivery of training to improve recruitment. And then again, there's just a bit about Mel's experience law. Mel is a chartered fellow of the CIPD and holds a certificate in the psychology of management. He also holds further qualifications in psychometric ability testing and personality assessment, Prince 2 project management, and additionally business coaching. So Mel, without further ado, would you like to take the platform?
Thank you, Andrea. Thank you for that introduction.
Thank you.
Welcome everyone. Good morning, everyone. So what I'm going to do is give you a little bit of background to the conflict webinar. And as part of that, what I'm going to get you to start thinking about is we deal with conflict every single day of our lives. But really, have you ever thought consciously how you and other people deal with it, as well as whether it's always effective? So a quote that I think is useful here is, "In the middle of difficulty lies opportunity," by Albert Einstein. And I think that's really interesting, particularly around conflict, because conflict is an issue that, as Andrea's touched on, we're going to deal with in the workplace from time to time and in personal relationships, friends, family. So let me just talk you through that introduction. So this is going to be a journey through what conflict is. We're going to understand how it develops. We're also going to understand and recognize patterns that it has at each stage. And we're going to explore a range of styles so that we can deal with it effectively. And as a result of that, you're going to have powerful and practical techniques as part of a toolkit to understand and manage conflict. And that kind of word there, toolkit, is something that I really want you to focus in on, because the things that I'm going to describe to you today are going to be particularly useful at different times when you approach conflict, when you're encountering conflict. So let's talk about then what I'm going to talk to you about specifically. So firstly, we're going to look at the triggers of conflict. What are these things that cause conflict? Then we're going to look at something called scarf threats. And this builds on some work by someone called David Rock, which I'm going to share with you. Then we're going to look at the stages of conflict. So these patterns that Andrea's talked about and I've mentioned. We're going to then conclude with the styles of conflict and a Q&A session at the end. So as Andrea said at the beginning, right at the outset, you're going to need a pen and paper. Please use the chat function. We really want to make this interactive. I'm going to be asking lots of questions as we go on. So let's start then really right at the outset. What is conflict? So can you please use the chat function to share your views? And Andrea, if you can let me know in a little while what you're seeing there, please. Absolutely. So what do you think conflict is?
Okay. So if you just want to use the chat box, guys, just freely type what you think. Disagreement, a different opinion, a division of interest, disagreement, arguments, anger, different points of views, tension between two different parties, being challenged on opinion view, great, stress, misunderstanding, yeah, quite a few. There's some attacked verbally.
Wow, okay.
Yeah, great. You've got quite a few ones on there.
Excellent.
Yeah.
All right, so let me just pick up some of those things that Andrea's fed back to me. We've talked about disagreement, we've talked about stress, we've talked about anger. So some of these are kind of what happens in the moment of conflict between the two parties, if it's two parties. And also we're talking about some of the emotional aspects of that, which we're going to explore further in a little bit more time. So let's just give one definition of conflict then. This is one definition: a serious disagreement or argument, typically a protracted one. And that word protracted is quite interesting here, because sometimes what happens with conflict is it can be cyclical. We can get into conflict with the same individual sometimes, and over a long period of time. Okay, so this is where I want you to start thinking about conflict and what are the reasons for conflict at work. So I want you to think about your experience of conflict, and you're going to need your piece of paper and pen now. And I'd like you to think about a recent conflict you've been involved in, and please note down your responses. So I'm going to ask you 3 questions. The first question I want you to think about are, what were the reasons for the conflict you were involved in? So I'm just going to give you 30 seconds or so before I move to the second question to think of a recent conflict and note down what were the reasons for it.
And I just want to point out, we won't be sharing your names or anything like that online. So please do be open and share your experiences. So everything is confidential. Okay, so what are the reasons for conflict? You just want to freely type into the chat box as well if you have any questions. But please do write this down.
Okay, so you've had a chance to note those down for yourself. So what were the reasons for that conflict? Secondly, how did you feel before, during and after? And I think this is really interesting, given some of the feedback you've shared, Andrea, with us about, you know, kind of anger, stress, things like that. So let's see what people write down for themselves.
So how did you feel before, during and after it? So there's a lot of people saying they're feeling frustrated, exhausted, and anxiety through the roof, stressed, betrayed.
Wow.
Demotivated.
Okay.
Apprehensive, vulnerable.
Very wide range there. Okay, so the last thing that I'd like you to think about is, how effectively did you deal with it, and what could you have done differently? So how effectively do you think that you dealt with it, and what could you have done differently? So again, I'm just going to give 30 seconds or so for you to think about that. Note it down for yourself.
So how effectively did you deal with it? What could you have done differently? So do write that down, but please, if you want to share anything in the chat box, go ahead. So think before responding, take time away, address the issue immediately, accepted it as it was management challenging.
Okay.
Drew a line under it and moved on, fair enough. Needed to be stronger with my views and not to give in. Didn't show emotions, but need to find the key to getting people on board.
Interesting, that one. I want to go back to that one, actually.
Yeah, great. We've got some really good comments here, Mel.
Great, excellent. What I would like everyone to do then is to just set that aside for the moment, those notes you've taken on this, because we're going to come back to this at the end of the session, and I want you to review it in the light of what we're talking about with some of the tools and techniques that I'm going to describe to you. So let's start off then with the common triggers of conflict, and some of these things might have come up in your list. So we've got being unappreciated. We've got pace of response. Now, this is quite an interesting one, because the way that I want you to think about this is through kind of different personalities. So some personalities operate in a kind of quite a fast pace way of responding, and other personalities respond in a more considered fashion. And what can happen there is that can cause conflict between those two different types of behaviors or personalities. So that's what I mean by passive response. Then we've got not being respected, unrealistic expectations. So you're expected to do something, whether that's the quality of work that is expected or the quantity, and that's unrealistic given the circumstances. Then we have different priorities, not being listened to, and being treated unfairly, which I'm going to go into more depth in a moment. So these are the common triggers of conflict. So let's talk about this work that I referred to earlier, which is the work from David Rock on SCARF. So what does SCARF mean? Well, let's talk about SCARF. So there's a series, mnemonic SCARF stands for status, certainty, autonomy, relatedness, and fairness. So what does these mean? Well, when everything's going really, really well, our status is such that people are recognized for their standing and position. Absolutely great. Certainty. People experience familiar patterns that lead to safe, predictable outcomes. Now, this is particularly pertinent right now, where we are in the middle of the pandemic, because this is being affected. Certainty is being affected for all of us in completely different ways. Then, when all is well, autonomy. People make decisions about important matters that affect them. And that, that feels good if we've got some of those choices. And that's what autonomy is about, freedom to make some choices. Then relatedness. People are treated as colleagues and as part of the group, and they know that they're among friends. And then finally, fairness. People see that the organization treats everyone with fairness and respect. And all of these things are part of, who we are and how well that we're feeling psychologically. So when all is well, these things are good. Mm-hmm. However, sometimes when these things are under threat, then what we're going to do is we are going to feel a different way. And some of the things that you've described, Andrea, that you fed back to me in the chat function, some of those negative feelings will cause issues, problems for individuals, and conflict can arise. So what can we do about that? So how to prevent a threat response when someone's status is threatened? Well, what we can do is we can identify and draw on people's areas of expertise. Encourage people to master new skills and reward the acquisition of new skills. So this is all about development, skills, utilization of people so that their status is not threatened. So what about certainty? What can we do about that? I mean, particularly, at times like this. Well, what we can do is we can share our plans and goals if we're a leader and manager. We can explain what will stay the same amidst change. So we know lots of things are changing, but we can explain what things will stay the same. And that in itself will be a help and support around that certainty aspect. We can break complex tasks into smaller, manageable tasks and reduce ambiguity whenever possible. We know that ambiguity is a large cause of stress. And of course, the topic we're talking about today is conflict, and stress does relate to conflict. And we'll talk about how a little bit later. Next, let's talk about autonomy. So what can we do to help people when that's threatened? Well, we can give people the latitude to make their own choices. We can allow staff within boundaries to organize their own work and set their own hours. And we can set a goal and allow people the authority and freedom to choose how to accomplish it. The way I'd like you to see this is sometimes what we do is we set a goal, which is the destination. But what we do is we can allow the freedom for people to choose the journey to get to the destination. So what can we do about threats to relatedness? Well, we need to design projects that involve collaboration, working together, connect in person, including virtual, even like this, rather than by email. Favor inclusion over exclusion wherever it makes sense, and avoid situations that bring negative public attention to individuals. So these are the things that we can do where relatedness is threatened. And then finally, for these SCARF threats is fairness. Well, we can allocate rewards and privileges based on clear, objective criteria. Spread information quickly, clearly, widely, and share the rationale behind tough decisions. I want to go back to that objective criteria, because where people perceive unfairness and they perceive subjectivity around rewards and privileges, that can cause this threat response, which can cause conflict. Okay, so let's move on from this now, and we're going to look at understanding and managing conflict in a little bit more detail. So to do that, we're going to look at 5 conflict stages, and I'm going to get you to think about these conflict stages and what they mean to you. So the first conflict stage I'm going to get you to think about, and I'd like you to put in the chats, is latent conflict. So can you share with us what you think that means? So what does latent conflict mean? And let's share that in the chats.
So what springs to your mind when you think of latent conflict? So when we did a test run earlier this week, I didn't have a clue. I honestly didn't have a clue. Great. Okay, so here we go. Unspoken issues, absolutely no idea. Building up, dormant underlying, bubbling under the surface, something left for a while, something not very obvious, a conflict that everyone tries to avoid and build up over time, the dislike of a person, where individuals have profoundly different values and standards of conduct, elephant in the room.
Okay.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Excellent. Yeah. Thank you. I want to go to 2 of the first ones that you said, Andrea, and you said dormant and bubbling under the surface. And I think they're really useful ways to look at this, because actually that reminds me, if I'm thinking about a metaphor for that, that reminds me of a volcano. And actually these 5 stages are very similar in that way. It's a useful way to think about that. So what is latent conflict? Well, latent conflict is we're not yet aware of it, but the potential exists to have conflict. And literally it is just a potential that exists. So this could be around things like competition for scarce resources. It could be where there's a role conflict, divergence of goals, or a drive for autonomy where someone's micromanaged. But all of these things have the potential for conflict. So this is stage 1. This is latent conflict. So what about perceived conflict? What do we think that is? And can you put your thoughts as to the definition of that in the chat function, please?
So perceived conflict, if you just want to put your, people think they're in conflict, but not necessarily true. Imagined conflict, your perception, the chat box is going wild, I can't even keep up. Misunderstood, looking for conflict, making assumptions, misunderstanding, again, another misunderstanding, one person, making assumptions again. A lot of people think it is making assumptions, misunderstanding. Brilliant. Another one, one-sided.
Excellent.
Aware of the potential for conflict, subconscious bias.
Okay, all right. So let's have a look at that one. So perceived conflict is when one or both parties perceive the other is likely to block or frustrate his or her goals. Now, this is really interesting because I think one of the common words you mentioned there, Andrea, in feeding back was assumptions.
Yes.
And these are the assumptions that it's the cognitive process, the thinking process that that's taking place for people at that point.
Yeah.
And this is all about the likelihood that they perceive that someone will block or frustrate their goals. So this is the perceived conflict. So let's look at the 3rd stage, which is felt conflict. So again, can you share that? Your thoughts as what does that actually mean?
So felt conflict, please do, experience real conflict, so actually experiencing it. Feeling threatened. Emotions, tension, feeling undervalued. In the midst of conflict, feeling it, feeling very real, actual conflict and experiencing it again, tangible, isolated, poor communication, which leaves bad feelings between parties. These are some good ones. Body language, passive aggressive behavior, tone of communication. Yeah.
Brilliant. Okay,
yeah,
thank
great.
you for that. So all of these kind of things are in the emotional aspects. They relate to the emotional aspects. So this is stress and anxiety is felt by one or both parties as a result of the conflict, but nothing has happened yet. Now, this is really key that I want people to understand, which is these are emotional responses that are taking place. Very often they're inside of us. So my heart rate might be increasing. I might perspire. I might flush. I might shake, but these are emotional responses to the stress that I'm experiencing and the chemicals being released in my body. However, we haven't even got to the conflict yet. So let's go to stage 4, manifest. What do we think that one is?
So manifest conflict. So what are people's thoughts? What springs to mind? It's really happening. It all comes out. It's out of control. Shouting, harsh words, in the face of conflict, aggression, body language, fisticuffs. I like that one. I love that one. Physically present, tears, verbal conflict, encounter signs and experience. It blows up or someone is getting devious and doing something subversive and negative. Aggressive tone, anger. So yeah, pretty similar answers to this one now.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Let me just pick up on a couple that you've mentioned there, Andrea. So it blows up. Yeah. Like a volcano. This is kind of obviously, yeah, that's the first one that I want to pick up on. The second one that I want to pick up on is obviously fisticuffs. Yeah. I can't leave that one.
Can't leave that one. The top
Okay. So the manifest stage of conflict is when conflict is open and can be observed by others. This is really interesting because not only is it open as it happening, but if people are around there, they can see it. So if this was happening in a meeting between two individuals, other people can see that. And that, of course, probably creates more stress in the individuals and perhaps drives a different dynamic and different behaviors. So that's stage 4. Now let's go to stage 5, aftermath. So what do we think this actually means? Can you share that in the chat function as well, please?
So final stage, aftermath, the fallout. The fallout, again, damaging resolution. The feelings after the conflicts took place, feeling drained, sulking, the consequences, guilt, the dynamic changes, depression, devastation, shadow, failure, humiliation, embarrassment. So these are all feelings, obviously. Disengagement, wow. Stress, no trust, hurt, repercussions, yeah.
Wow. Okay.
Broken relationships, obviously, yes.
That is really interesting because Andrea, in the comments that you've just shared back with us, in the main, they are all negative. Yes. I think that I heard a positive one right at the outset of you feeding back, and that was, I think the word you used was resolution.
Yeah.
Now, so this essentially, there's 2 outcomes, because of course the aftermath is about the outcome, and there's 2 outcomes. There's the situation, the conflict is resolved, or it isn't. Now, if it's resolved, that's fine. Absolutely fine. It's resolved. It has probably been painful going through this, but there is resolution. However, if it's not resolved, I'd like you to think about a situation. And I'd like you to think about a situation whereby you're in a meeting and it's at work, and there's a large group of people there, and there's a disagreement, a conflict that takes place between you and someone else. It's not resolved. You then go back, because it's a weekly meeting next week, but it's not resolved. Which of the stages would you come back into? So which stage would you come back? Stage 1, 2, where would you come back in to that meeting the next week if it had been unresolved? Could you put that in the chat function, please?
Yeah, I've got a lot of 3s, a couple of 2s, a 4, I think. Yeah, a lot of 3s coming through. 2 to 3, 2 to 3, so in the middle. Yeah. 3/4. So I think 3's winning here, Mel.
Okay, so 3's winning. That's probably what I would expect, 3, because most of us, if we're going back into a meeting where we've had a disagreement or a conflict with someone and it hasn't been resolved, and we're going back into that, we're going to have the feelings of stress. Now, what's quite interesting, I find, about that is if I use my water bottle here as a metaphor, the stress will bring us right up to the top here, and then a small amount, just a small amount of conflict or a small amount of additional dynamic with that person will cause then the stress to come out and the conflict to go into manifest conflict. Okay, so these are our 5 conflict stages. So let's think about dealing with conflict. And now we understand the stages of conflict. How do we deal with it effectively? Could you put your thoughts in the chat function, please? So now we understand how we deal with conflict and the stages. How do we deal with it effectively?
Prepare, communicate, rehearse, hear both sides of the story again. Empathy, listen, build alliances, forgive, recognize how we both feel, reflect, notice but not react, count to 10 before you respond, pause, deal with it in private, patience, avoid blame, breathe, good one, calm down, understand the situation, mediate,
Okay. These are all really rational responses. So what I would like you to think about now is I'd like you to think about how people react under stress. So what typically do we do under stress as human beings? Would you share that in the chat function, please?
It'd be interesting to see if we've got a lot of introverts or extroverts with this one. Withdraw, stop listening, cry, avoid, disengage, fight, avoid, breathe, feel anxious, stand my ground, defend, become petty, count to 10, become less tolerant, panic, eat chocolate. Like that one. I agree with whoever said that one.
That's a new, that's going to be a new style, that one.
Just always have a bar of chocolate in your pocket just in case. Empathize. Have a massive increase in blood sugar and heart rate.
Wow, definitely.
Wow, that's, rant.
Okay.
Revenge,
All right, thank you for that. So what we're going to do is we're going to talk about that now, because what we have is there are 5 different styles to manage conflict, and you're going to recognize some of those within the things that you've just shared with us. So clearly, when we talk about a stress response in human beings, we all know about the fight or flight response, and you're going to see the fight or flight response among the 5 styles to manage conflict. So let's go through those 5 styles that we've got. So firstly, avoid, where we don't deal with it. Now, what I'd like you to do is I'd like you to think about avoid in kind of 2 ways. We've got permanent avoid and temporary avoid. So permanent avoid is I'm not dealing with it. Temporary avoid is I'm not dealing with it now, but I'll deal with it tomorrow. And if tomorrow comes and I deal with it, fine. If tomorrow comes and I don't deal with it, temporary avoid may have turned into permanent avoid. So that's one style. Second style, accommodate, which is really where I allow the other person to have their way. So that's accommodate. That's the second style. Third style is compromise, where we move a little bit on both sides. So there's some movement from you and there's some movement from me on both sides of this. That's compromise. The fourth style is collaborate, where we work together. The goal is that you're going to get everything that you want, and the goal is that I'm going to get everything I want. And then the final style is compete, where I'm seeking to get my way. So you can see when we look at fight and flight, these are avoid, which is flight, and fight is compete. So these are the 5 styles that we've got to use to manage conflict. So let's look at how they work together and how they actually operate. But what's the best style to deal with conflict? Would you share, please, in the chat, what you think is the best style to deal with conflict?
Okay, so we've got compromise, collaborate. It depends. Depends on the conflict. Yeah, it depends on the situation, depends on the person. Openness. A lot of collaborate. Yeah, collaborate again, listening, be assertive without being aggressive. Win-win, communicate. Yeah, a lot of collaborate and compromise comments coming up now. Okay,
so lots of collaborate comments coming up. Okay, so that's absolutely fine. So is collaborate a good style to use? Yeah, of course it's a good style, but let's have a look at more about that answer then. So conflict styles, in the way that this is described, looks at 2 dimensions: cooperativeness from low to high on that horizontal axis as you're looking at it. So this is where the degree to which people focus on other people's needs and mutual relationships. And then assertiveness. That's the degree to which I focus on my needs, desired outcomes, and the agenda. So I'm going to describe to you with each of these where they fit on this matrix. And I'm going to give you a little bit of background on them. So to begin with, we're going to look at the first style, which is avoid. Now, where you're going to see that on the matrix is this is a low cooperative and a low assertive mode or style. And the goal here, when someone's using this, is to delay. So it's a no way style, but it's actually very useful when time is needed to calm down. And also it's useful when the situation will get better by itself. So the saying here with this one is let sleeping dogs lie. So that's avoid. Our next style is accommodate, which we can really explain by saying your way. So avoid was no way, accommodate is your way. And this is where the goal is to yield. And it's useful when the issue is small within the bigger picture. It's also useful when you recognize that you're wrong and they're right. And the way that I'd like you to think about this is sometimes it's useful when you're okay to lose the battle, but win the war. Next, we're moving up into more assertive and more cooperative, which is compromise, which is halfway. This is where the goal is to find the middle ground, particularly useful when goals are far apart and progress is needed. But goodwill is required from both to build the relationship, because if only one person is moving, then that probably tends more towards accommodation. Yeah. So it needs trust and the building of relationships so that people can shift from their positions to closer positions. So the saying here is let's meet in the middle. So next we have the high assertive and low cooperative style of compete, which is my way. Here the goal is to win. It's useful when you are right or they're wrong. It's also useful where there are no other options. And it's useful where there are no other options and you've explored all other options. And the way that you can remember this is the I know best. I'm going to use this style. That's what someone would think. And our last style is both a high assertive and high cooperative style, and that's collaborate, and that's our way. This is where the goal is to achieve a win-win outcome. And Andrea, you fed this back, I think in the chat, someone mentioned this. And this is useful when relationships and tasks are important, when we need to problem solve together and two heads are better than one. Mm-hmm. Now, typically what we would say here is that collaborate is a really, really good style. And I think that's one of the things that you fed back, Andrea. But can anyone think of any downsides to collaborate? Any downsides to collaborate? And can you share that in the chat function, please?
So I've just got a question there. How can you use competing when it is with your colleagues? How can you use competing when it is with your colleagues?
How can you use it, or is it the right one to use?
Just a question, how can you use competing when it's with your colleagues? Okay. But we've got more comments coming through, more conflict. When the other person has a strong character, never get an outcome is always discussing. I could lose the original point, different goals, diluting the outcomes, takes time, you lose the point. What else have we got? Takes time. Again, we've got a few takes time. Assumes equality of power, resources, etc. I'm gonna have to make this chat box bigger, I think. A lot coming through. When it may damage the relationship in the longer term, time and resource used to reach this stage, opportunity cost. The other person takes ownership and the glory.
Yeah.
One might have to give in. Different values, yeah.
So let me pick up on some of those. So I want to come back to the time issue that you've mentioned there. One person may give in. I want to come back to that, but I want to go back to your original question, Andrea, because you asked me about the compete style and when you can use it with a colleague. I think that was the question. How can I use this with a colleague? Okay, let me give you some circumstances in which you might use that with a colleague. And this is a might, because remember, you've got choices here. But if someone said something that was inappropriate and that you could not leave because, for example, that person had made a comment that went against the ethics or went against particular law, then you might think, actually, I cannot allow that comment to stand. I need to address it. And I'm going to tell that person that is wrong to behave like that. I hope that answers.
Yeah, and also, which I might have missed, is if it's a senior colleague, what if it's a senior colleague?
I think then what I would say to you is we would be adding additional things in here, which is about building relationships with that person, but being tactful and diplomatic in the way that you address the issue. So let's go back, Andrea, to what you were sharing. I think you said, could you just repeat back those two? There was one about time and the other one was about...
Oh, there's that many.
I think the other one was about kind of, you might give in, I think.
Yes, that one came up a couple of times.
Yeah, now what I want to say about that is that if that is the case, now sometimes a competitive person may see collaboration as a weakness. And what happens is that if that person is giving in, then actually what's happening there is it's not collaboration. One person is accommodating. So they have shifted in that situation from collaboration, which is working together, to accommodation, which is saying, okay, we'll do it your way. So if that were to happen, both parties would have shifted from the collaboration side of things. One perhaps would have gone to compete. The other one would have gone to accommodate. So that kind of answers that point. The second one is the point that you mentioned, Andrea, about time. Definitely.
Yes.
Collaboration, by its very nature, working together, will take more time. And of course, this style is where we've got high cooperativeness. So this is where relationships are really important. So if we think task is really important and we think relationship is really important, then collaboration is a really good thing to do. But it's not the best thing to do. So we're going to talk about the best in a moment. But before we do that, I want to just explore a couple of things. And I'd like everyone to think about these 5 styles. Now, do we use all of these 5 styles? Perhaps. Do we have favorites? Definitely. All of us have favorites, depending on who we are and depending on our personality. Could I get you to write down and share in the chat function, please, your 2 favorite styles of these 5? So which 2 do you find that you use the most of? And let's see what we're seeing in the chat function.
Yeah. Compromising and collaborating, collaborating and competing, compromising and collaborating again, competing and yeah. So it's those 2 that are quite popular. Collaborate and compromise, compete and collaborate, compete and avoid, accommodate and collaborate. Yeah, so collaborate and compromise is quite, collaborating and avoiding depends on who I'm dealing with.
Yeah.
Avoiding and accommodating, so first accommodating one. Collaborating and avoiding critical scenarios, command and control. Yeah, so I'm going to say compromise and collaborate are the 2.
They're the 2 popular ones.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Excellent. Thank you for that. So what I want to do is just get you to think about the overuse or underuse of any of these styles, because really, when I asked that question a few minutes ago as to which one's the best one, of course, there isn't a best one. All of us, many of us would think collaborate and compromise are the best. Yeah. Are they good styles to use? Yes, they're great. They're absolutely brilliant styles to use, but they're not the best styles. The way I'd like you to think about this, please, is they're situational. I want you to go back to what we were talking about right at the outset of the webinar, when we were talking about the toolkit. I want you to think about these as 5 tools to have in your toolkit. There are no good ones. There are no bad ones. They're situational. However, the underuse of any of these or the overuse of any of these are likely to cause you or people around you challenges. So, for example, if I always compete, life's probably not going to be too pleasant for people around me. Equally, if I never avoid, I'm going to have some problems there as well. But if I always avoid, I'm going to have different problems. So I'd like you to think about this. Remember that these are 5 tools. They're situational, but an underuse or overuse of any of them will have consequences for you and others around you.
Yeah.
So let's move on from that. And we're going to go back to what you wrote down at the beginning of the webinar about your experience of conflict. So if I could get you to pick up those notes, please, or rethink about it. And I'm going to get you to think about, in the light of what we've just discussed on the webinar, what conflict style or styles were you using in that situation?
So if you want to use the comments box, yeah, avoid, accommodating, compromising, all of them, competing, avoid, probably a bit of compete, all, accommodating, roller coaster of them all, yeah, a mixture.
Okay,
yeah.
All right, so we kind of thought about what conflict style or styles you were using. Now, as a result of this, what conflict style or styles would you use now for a better outcome in that situation that you were thinking of or that you had experienced?
Working together, compromise, avoid, compromise, compete. It's a lot of think I'd say a lot of compromises coming through.
Yeah.
A few avoids, so compromise, avoid, one of those two. Collaborate, a few collaborates are coming through. Avoiders if it was quite heated.
Yeah.
Compromise, yeah. A bit of a mix, actually, yeah.
Okay, and we would expect it to be a mix because we've got different situations with different people having utilized different styles at the beginning. So our third question then is knowing the conflict stages. We talked those through earlier, the latent, perceived, felt, manifest, and aftermath. So knowing those conflict stages, how could you have prevented the conflict from escalating? So could you share those thoughts in the chat function, please? So knowing the conflict stages, how could you have prevented the conflict from escalating?
Someone said, I use wisdom to deal with it. Acknowledge view and expertise. Deal with it earlier. Open dialogue. Job hunt. Address the person. Better stakeholder analysis beforehand. Manage expectations earlier. See from the other person's point of view. Better communication. Hindsight is a wonderful thing. Mediate, report it if feeling bullied. Listen. Someone said unplug their internet. Someone was laughing at that as well. Yeah, someone's laughing about the unplug their internet comment, which is quite funny. Address the situation. Yeah, recognize the differences. Check if we're all on the same page from the start.
Yeah.
Have reasonable expectations and empathize to avoid escalation or conflict.
Yeah.
Set ground rules. Yeah, okay. We've got quite a mixed response to this. Recognize that some conflict cannot be resolved, which is fair enough, and I agree.
Yeah, yeah,
absolutely.
And I think with that, some conflicts can't be resolved, and actually sometimes conflicts can bring good things. And this is something that we haven't mentioned on the webinar at the moment, but sometimes, even though there can be pain along the way, there can be good things that come out of conflicts. Okay, so that's a useful thing, I think, for you to reflect on and think about as a result of the webinar. But let me just do a recap of our session as we're reaching a conclusion now. Firstly, there are common triggers of conflict, and we've talked about some of those, and you shared some of those from a personal perspective. Secondly, there are scarf threats. So these scarf threats stand for status, if our status is threatened, if certainty is threatened, autonomy, relatedness, and fairness. So there are scarf threats, and we talked about how to manage those and deal with those. Next, we've got the 5 conflict stages. So we've got latent conflict, perceived conflict, felt conflict, manifest, and aftermath. And then we've got 5 conflict styles. So the 5 conflict styles, in no particular order: accommodate, avoid, compromise, compete, and collaborate. And a final thing that I want to just leave you with is that remember that the styles are like keys. If one doesn't work, try another. Okay, so with that, Andrea.
Thank you. Great. Good stuff. Now, thank you so much, Mel, for delivering that content. Now, I know there's been quite a lot of comments and questions coming through wildly from start to end. Please, if you've got any questions, I know there's a few questions in there that I might not have been able to get to, but can we use the Q&A box, the chat box, if you've got any questions for Mel? That would be absolutely fantastic. Or if you can't think of anything right now, we would be open, for you to approach us at the end of the webinar or at a later date, and I'm sure we can help you answer those questions. There was one question that did pop up that I'd seen a few moments ago, Mel. At what point does criticism become conflict?
Well, I would suspect that criticism is is coming one way, and then I guess the conflict would happen or not, depending on the person's response.
Great. I hope
So that's kind of how I see it. So criticism is a one-way direction, and then conflict would happen or not as a result of how that person responds.
Have you got any tips for trying to alter your style?
Practice.
Practice. Yeah.
Practice. Yes. Practice.
Thank you for that. If the conflict cannot be resolved, other party won't even consider your views, where do you go? So if the conflict cannot be resolved, the other party won't even consider your views, where do you go? What do you do?
Well, I guess if we just go back very, very quickly here, these are the 5 choices that you've got. And I guess one of the choices that you have there is to avoid it. And that might be temporary or it might be permanently. But these are always the 5 choices you've got in the conflict. You can try and work together as well. They might not be willing to work together now. They might be tomorrow or next week or next month. So we don't have to look at these as absolute styles. We can shift styles as well. Great.
Thank you. I hope that's answered your question. Another question is there any guide which style to use? Or, sorry, we'll skip that one. What point does, is understanding neurodiversity a useful tool? Is understanding neurodiversity a useful tool?
I think so, yes.
Yeah.
I think it's an incredibly useful tool because I think this is diverse. I think what we've been talking about is diversity of thinking and diversity of behavior. And these are all examples of that. So I think it's incredibly useful.
Brilliant. Hope that's answered your question. Thank you. What have we got here? Is there ever a situation where permanent avoidance is okay?
I guess there might be. I can't think of it at the moment what that is. Permanent avoidance. Maybe when all of the others have been exhausted because they haven't been useful or effective, perhaps.
Great. Thank you, Mel. And thank you for your question. Sometimes self-defense in face of threat to existence takes over. How do you cope with this? How to cope with this?
Could you repeat the question, please?
Of course. So sometimes self-defense in face of threat to existence takes over. What would your advice be on how to cope with this?
So I guess I'm kind of paraphrasing here. I think what you're talking about there is fight or flight response and maybe fight response. I think taking time to think, because what we need to do is we need to activate our rational brain as opposed to our natural emotional response. So I would say take time to think through what you're going to do rather than an emotive response, which is not thought through.
Yeah. Fantastic. Thank you. I hope that's answered your question. Okay, so there's a couple of people asking if they're going to receive the slides. Absolutely, you will receive the slides from us. You will also receive the recording as well. I just want to make that quite clear. You will receive the slides from Civil Service College and along with the video as well. Okay, so one last question we'll squeeze in. Any tips for dealing with a repeat offender who is to have their own way all the time? So any tips for dealing with a repeat offender who has to have their own way all the time?
Okay, some tips. I think that depends on whether the person is receptive to those tips or not. If they are, you can talk to them about models like this. If they're not, I think perhaps talking about the consequences of their behavior on others might be a useful place to start. I think with anything, when we have habitual behavior, so in this way, if someone is habitually competing, then it's unlearning that and learning a new behavior. But like any kind of learning, we've got to want to learn to do that.
Yeah, brilliant. Okay, well, thank you everyone for all of your questions. I am very, very mindful that we haven't been able to answer them all. But again, if you do have any questions that you want to speak to us at the very, very end after the webinar, please do contact us. I will put my email address in the chat box at the very end so you can contact me. Mel, if you could just go to the next slide, that would be fantastic. Thank you very, very much. Okay, so more webinar news. We try to run these every single week. So we do actually have back-to-back webinars now up until the end of November time, when we are in the middle of scheduling them for you for December as well. But in order to keep up to date with our webinars and what we're running, please do sign up to our training alerts at www.civilservicecollege.org.uk. If we could just pop to the next slide there, Mel, thank you. And we've got lots of people commenting, Mel, and saying thank you. I don't know if you can see the comments there. But yeah, in order to stay connected with the Civil Service College, this is our social media handle. It's at cscollege.org. So it's at cscollege.org. We are on Instagram, we're on Facebook, we're on Twitter, we're on LinkedIn, and of course we're on YouTube as well, where this video will be posted. So please do keep up to date with what we're doing, the courses we're running, and of course our weekly webinars. And yeah, we hope to see you again very, very soon. Thank you so much to all of our participants. We've had a fantastic turnout this morning. And obviously, thank you so much to Mel. It's been fantastic working with you. Again, I hope you've enjoyed this morning. Yeah,
absolute
great.
Pleasure.
Fantastic. And yeah, thank you very much for your time, and hopefully we'll get Mel back on again very, very soon. So yeah, in the meantime, please do stay safe, everybody, and stay connected, of course. We'd love to hear from you and see you again very soon. Okay?
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Bye.